yellow sticky notes. If a question comes to mind during, and you want either a qualification or more information, please write it on a sticky note, because the time tonight's pretty tight.
And great to see so many of you here, and thank you for taking your Monday night out. This is the start in terms of a conversation between now and early December on really one of the biggest changes in our city, and it's a really exciting time. And what we want as a city is to really get your feedback on how we think that these changes that the council's proposing can be improved and changed and modified, so that when it comes back to us early in the new year, we can really make sure we're representing our community. Because I want you tonight also, you may not get all your questions answered, or things may come up later, where you can call me. We've got several of our councillors here. With the councillors who are here, just mind standing up quickly, just so people can have a sense to jump up. So Dave Coggin, Rachel Pemberton, John Strachan, Dave Hume, Josh Wilson, and Ingrid Walton, and Andrew Sullivan, are all here tonight, and of course we'll be able to contact them at any time. We also have our key planning staff working on this project, Ian James, up the front here, who's our urban designer, and Phil St John, who I saw somewhere. Phil is a director of planning, and Paul Garbutt, who is the manager of strategic planning at the City of Fremantle. So they're all the key staff you can speak to, as well as Andrew Eastick, who's down the back, who's our manager of economic development. But of course, we see this is one of those key projects where planning and economic development come together.
There are a cluster of questions around the issue of quality of design. There were no examples of good and bad buildings in relation to height and mass. Can we be certain that the new buildings will be really of high quality? So there's that whole issue again about quality.
We have a very clear mandate to advise council on design quality that meets a certain level of performance, that meets the strategic intent that the council and the community has outlined for these key areas in Fremantle. Fremantle is looking for new development, but not development at any cost. It's the right development for Fremantle, and so quality is intrinsic to that equation. The position that the committee has generally adopted is that we as a committee at least are less concerned by the number of metres attached to a new building proposal, and we're far more interested in what contribution it makes to the public realm. Does it overshadow a neighbouring property? Does it offer shelter, weather protection? Does it make a contribution to the activation of the street? Is it the right scale and form, and does it have the right sort of grain, or kind of, what we would say is the right sort of formal response to the character of its location? Those are the sorts of questions that we ask about a new proposal. And I think they're far more significant than whether a new building is 14 metres or 15.2 metres.
This might come as a surprise to you. The next topic is about density and height. So can you make some comments about the issue to do with height and density, carbon neutral, green spaces, health, those types of things?
There are the odd study which has shown it, but the vast majority have shown there's no relationship between health, mental health, social health and height or density. What it shows is that the denser areas have more intensive forms of living, more intensive outcomes, so you can have both. If there's extreme poverty and a lot of crime around, then you'll intensify that. If you have high culture and creativity, then you'll intensify that. It's an intensity thing. Now, is it possible for Fremantle to intensify the wonderful creative things we do here? Yes, it is. The last 10 years of high density development have been very, very wealthy. They have not been done for affordability. And there's a whole range of reasons for that. But it is possible, and there are a number of cities that have implemented processes to enable affordable housing to go in as part of it. You can make it very small bed-sit type accommodation that's ideal for my students. They would love to live in Fremantle. Only a few of them are able to. You can do that and you will get those kind of outcomes. The question is to get that mix, and there's plenty of expertise around now to show how that can be done and how it can be built into the process of negotiating with developers, not only what it looks like and how green it is, but how much affordable housing can get there.
Just to return very briefly to the question earlier, Alan, about can you sort of guarantee good design outcomes? How do we mandate it? There isn't a way of guaranteeing it. Our committee on its own won't be able to do it. What you can do is encourage better design outcomes, and I think that's what the city is working to do. So my point earlier about the communication that the city has been working to put together recently is about helping developers, helping people interested in investing in Fremantle understand that design outcomes are now important. They're valued by the community of Fremantle, and they're critical to the approval processes that are now in place. So there is that message that goes out to developers that they must understand what the provisions are, what the approval mechanisms are in Fremantle for new development, that it must be of a very high standard and must perform at a very high level. That means that developers are likely to get better architects, higher skilled architects with very good design credentials who can meet those sort of performance criteria. The committee is one instrument, if you like, that is also part of the equation in providing advice to council. And then, as Peter rightly mentioned, it's the council laws, your elected members, who make those decisions in the final instance.
Would you join me in thanking our three speakers and panellists for the presentation? Eminent Councillor Andrew Sullivan is going to speak now about the event. And again, if you have any specific questions, could you just, again, write them, and we'll do the same thing. We'll try and cluster them so that Andrew can deal with them. But thank you very much, Andrew. Go right.
Thanks, Alan. Amendment 49 is it's based on the recommendations that came out of the City Centre Strategic Sites Working Group, one of the working groups established by the new council 2 years ago, back in July 2010. It comprised of 2 councillors and the mayor. It also included volunteer community members and the representatives from the Chamber of Commerce and the Fremantle Society. The Strategic Sites Working Group had a purpose to consider the possible amendments to the town planning scheme to facilitate redevelopment of key strategic sites in the city. That was a very clear objective of the council's strategic plan that it developed early on. We met over more than 20 times, and we eventually reported to council in July 2011, so a full year's work. We did many things, but here is a bit of a snapshot of the sorts of things that we discussed during those 20-odd meetings. We identified, obviously, the strategic sites, which in itself wasn't all that hard. They had to be big sites, they had to be sites that were able to really have an impact in terms of what they could produce for the city. They had to be ready for development and the like. We also had to try and meet, if possible, the objectives of the strategic plan, which had set about a number of targets. And those targets included, for example, we needed 20 to 25,000 extra square metres of retail floor space, because that's how much we had lost in the last 20 years. We needed something like 70,000 square metres of extra office accommodation, because that was very much going to be the employment generator that would replace the activity that had been lost in the port. We also did streetscape analysis, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail later, but that looks at the character of different areas, different precincts. We also looked at issues about the public amenity that exists in those areas, but also where public amenity in those areas was actually currently very poor. But we also looked at things like overshadowing, protection from the elements, every different aspect that makes public space important. We looked at the catchment of the railway station and where development should be, so the 800-metre walkability catchment and how much population could be achieved in those areas. We also looked at the retail model plan. There was another working group that was going on at the time, the Economic Development Working Group, and they had produced through consultants the retail model plan, which was very much trying to identify what was needed in the retail shopping sector of Fremantle to try and bring it forward. We liaised with some property owners. Some of that was done by the committee. Some of it, at the request of property owners, was done by myself and the mayor and staff. Not every owner and developer wants to sit down with the committee, funnily enough. But we also talked about and gave some information to the Design Advisory Committee about the types of development principles that we'd like to see as well. We did a hell of a lot more than that. The strategic sites that we identified are those in blue. We didn't have a mandate to actually look at Victoria Quay or the areas that aren't in direct planning control of the city. So Victoria Quay and the Fishing Boat Harbour, whilst we consider them to be strategic sites, we didn't really have a mandate to go and look at those specifically. But you can see where most of the strategic sites are. They're the large sites, the ones that are able to be redeveloped. In terms of Amendment 49, it reduces down to those 4 sites in the CBD. So a number of the strategic sites, for example, Victoria Quay and around the railway station, do drop off. This amendment, it doesn't mean the city isn't focused on those, it just means they're not part of this particular stage of the city's focus. Obviously, you would have heard about the Fremantle Union, and that certainly will be looking at Victoria Quay and around the Fremantle railway station. The sites are very much clustered in the inner East End, if you like. We call the other East End the car park area at the East End, so we now have to call this the inner East End or Fremantle Central or City Central, so we haven't really come up with a good name for it yet, but the working title is was it City Central? But it's clustered around 2 really important elements that were picked up in the retail model plan, and that is the way in which the retail model must work, and that is rail station, King Square, Queen Street, Adelaide Street. That little ribbon of yellow is the critical part of the retail model plan. The sites, typically as they appear now, are mostly 1960s and 1980s buildings. They have very limited cultural significance to most people. I have had one person say, "Don't you dare touch mine," but there you go. And they're considered suitable for redevelopment from a conservation point of view. To give you a bit of a feel, this is the area that we're talking about in the 1930s. And when I first saw this slide, I must admit, I sat there and I sort of crossed off all the buildings that have been knocked down. And I was absolutely gobsmacked just how many have disappeared from that slide. And they've disappeared in those areas. So there's been virtually a wholesale change to the way in which that environment has turned around since the 1970s, obviously in a negative way. And we've got the sort of types of character that we're quite familiar with. Say that ugly buildings are tall buildings is not necessarily true. They can also be quite squat buildings. Whilst these actually probably did look to many people quite interesting and modern at their time, they've of course become uglier and uglier as the years go by. I wanted to also just reiterate that issue about where the heritage buildings are in Fremantle and where they are. And this is a map that actually shows you all the heritage listed places in the Fremantle CBD. The black line is where the scheme amendment is bound. So you can see there are a couple of heritage sites in there. You'll even note that the Myer site, F, is heritage listed, not because of the Myer building, but because of the building that used to be on the site. It's an association listing rather than the actual fabric that's there. But you can see by and large from a precinct perspective, it isn't touching the bulk of the heritage buildings. Some of the things that we've looked at in terms of the benefits of the Amendment 49, we definitely need a lot more people living and working in the CBD. And I think one of the questions was asked about how do you get the right balance? I mean, are you going to make it a dormitory suburb? There's 70,000 square metres of extra office accommodation will bring in around about the same number of people during the day as the 15,000 new residences will bring in at night time. So 1,500. So 15,000 was probably no one reacted, Brad, so it's all right.
There were a couple of people who fainted.
We can call the ambulance. 1,500. So the 1,500 extra residences generates about the same number of extra people in that area as the 70,000 square metres of floor space of office accommodation. And you get that nice mix that you have the same sort of density at night time as you do at daytime in terms of people in the street. It also provides the opportunity to provide that increased floor space and a distinctive identity to that precinct. It also provides an opportunity for a more diverse range of uses. At the moment it's primarily retail, and so the moment the shops shut, guess what? it's a ghost town. And guess what? It gets filled by the things which we all find unsavoury in that environment. So we're trying to create the opportunity for a much more diverse environment. And it also allows us to make a more compact city centre. One of the problems we have in the city is it's limited space in which to actually grow. So we do need to try and fill in where we can, and quite clearly this is an area that provides a lot of opportunity for that infill. On the flip side, protects those areas which are heritage. So by allowing the development of the Amendment 49 areas, it also provides the opportunity to not do development, to not intensify those other areas, those heritage areas. But it also protects heritage places by bringing in a lot more people. The one thing that protects heritage building more than anything else is having activity. Activity generates uses for buildings. If you can generate uses for buildings, whether they be new or heritage, you will conserve them. And that's really important. We've seen that with Notre Dame. You might not agree with Notre Dame, but it's generated activity and it's conserved the buildings. And good accessibility. And we mean by that, the issue of rain protection and pedestrianisation and being able to get through things. We have a number of arcades which are tortuous and you don't know your way through. We need, through development, to provide better accessibility. Better accessibility to the rail station was mentioned, and clearly that's something that's on the agenda. This is a bit of an overlay between the retail model plan, which is in the yellow, if you like, which identifies the key activity anchors in the city centre, and where the strategic sites are. And you can see quite clearly that the key activity anchors and the linkages between them are going to be very heavily influenced by how we redevelop those areas. They're both, hand in glove kind of issues. So a bit of a rundown of the actual scheme. The Queen and Adelaide streets, those two streets that were in yellow, identified as our new shopping streets. I mean, obviously they're already shopping streets, but these will be the primary shopping streets of Fremantle, along with Market Street, obviously. We need, therefore, to widen Queen Street, particularly down at the railway station end, to make it a more pedestrian-friendly environment. We also need to have fully activated frontages. That means continuous shopping activity, continuous activity along the footpath. Primarily, it needs to be retailing in those streets because they are our key shopping streets, so we mandate that. That's what's in the mandatory requirements. Small and medium scale shop frontages, very much the character of a high street environment. That's what we have in Fremantle. There's a retail model which is a high street kind of retailing, and therefore that's characterised by medium and small scale shop frontages rather than huge big box kind of look to it. We can see office, commercial, residential, education, hotels, hospitality, so a broad range of activities. On the larger lots, because there is a very clear demand in the strategic plan for office accommodation, we've actually said that you have to have at least 15% office floor space in the upper areas, and that's quite challenging for the developers. So anyone who thinks this is all about an easy road for developers, it's actually incredibly hard to achieve that for most developers. We also need a range of residential. So the question was about affordability and will it just be the rich moving into 300 square metre apartments? No, it won't. We will continue the work that was in the East End into this amendment by actually requiring a lot more one bed and studio units. That's certainly what's in the written proposal.